Hello everyone, I'm Pamela Rakowski and I am a historian of the Australian Afghan Cameleers. Tonight we're actually spending some time with a genuine Afghan Cameleer descendant. Her name is Janice, her maiden name is Janice Muhammad, and she'll tell you more about her grandfather's background, Pir Muhammad, of the Beltane region, but she'll elaborate more. So welcome, Janice.
Thank you, Pamela, for having me here this evening, and thank you to the rest of the group of people who have put me in this position, that I am fortunate enough to represent my grandfather, Pir Muhammad. He was young when he came out here from Afghanistan. I guess it was Afghanistan, I'm not sure. He was born in Peshawar, and of course in those days it was Afghanistan, and he came out here, I believe, with his own camels. Now, you look at those old ships of those days, being down in the hull, looking after your animals, and coming from one side of the world to the other, unknowing what you were coming to, because Sir Thomas Elder and Charles Stuckey had been over to India and thought these camels would be good for the operation that Sir Thomas Elder had, and so they approached these people, and so many men said that they would come out here. As I said, some brought their camels, and grandfather came out on the boat called the Lansdowne, and that was named after some town or something like that, apparently in England, because in those days India was under the British colony, and Queen Victoria in those days was the Queen, and so they acknowledged her in all their happenings, and they recognised that she was the head of the country, because that is how it was. She was, as I said, she was the Queen. And where he came to, we don't know. There's so much about Grandad Pir that we don't know. I only wished he was here now, or even one of my own father or one of my aunt or uncles that I could ask or question, because over the years I've got a lot of questions. And unfortunately, you see, we leave these things too late, or we don't think about them, and so we lose all that history. But as we get older, we want to know so much, and there's nobody we can talk to and tell us anything.
So Janice, when he came here, he wasn't married, he was a single man. And when he finally came here, was that in, you think it was South Australia?
Well, from what I've been told, he left a wife and a family back in Afghanistan, and apparently it's been written that he never saw them again. So where he landed, I don't know. I'm trying to find that out, where the Lansdowne landed, whether it was in Western Australia or Port Augusta, or actually where it was. But from that boat, where he went after that, nobody knows. We don't know. The only thing he did tell Dad, that he'd brought a lot of jewels, he had a lot of official paperwork, and he was as if he was not really the top one in the country, but his family were very well positioned, and his father apparently was a lawyer, and of course Grandad being the youngest member of the family, well, he was allowed to travel, and so he'd travelled through lots of countries before he came here to somewhere in Australia. And after that, of course, he worked and travelled with his camels. And back in the 1890s, I think it was, he came down through the McDonnell Ranges with his team.
Which is near Alice Springs.
Yes, which is, yes, coming in through to Alice Springs. And he had the team all loaded, and people just could not believe that he came in such a way, with himself being young, dressed in the Afghan clothing, and so young, and with this camel team already packed.
So he must have come down from Alice Springs and then came down towards Port Augusta, because in Port Augusta he met his wife. Is that right? And married her there?
Yes, he met a girl by the name of Ruby Rita Stewart. Her father was a Scotsman, red hair, red beard, tall man, played the bagpipes, used to, as he got older, he went blind, poor man, and he used to play the bagpipes, and his grandchildren used to think it was funny, and they used to run him into the fences and all that sort of thing. And the auntie said, "Oh, Janice, we were so cruel."
Now, Ruby had some other sisters too, didn't she? And they also married Afghan Cameleers.
Yes. Ruby Rita had 3 sisters and 1 brother. Agnes married Mullamas and Khan, and they lived in Maree. They had about, I think it was 9 or 11 children, and then Barbara Ellen was the eldest. Agnes, I think Agnes Maud was the eldest, and then there was Barbara Ellen. She married a man by the name of Mir Muhammad, and then he took off, and then she married a man by Khan. Akbar Khan, yes. And then there was James Wiley. He married a part Aboriginal lady by the name of Essie Simpson, but apparently her real name was Simone, or something like that, Italian. Apparently her father was an Italian.
And Agnes also had another sister, Niger Stewart. She married Niger. Niger Stewart married Musha Baluch. Musha Mustan.
No, that's from another family.
Yeah, Musha Mustan, I said.
Yeah, but that wasn't...
oh, that's not that family.
No, okay. That's not that family. No, right. No. And, yes, so then Ruby Rita and Pierre were married in Port Augusta, and then from there... well, we don't know where they went, but the next pickup we got was they were living at a little place called Mukatuna, and that was a mining, well, you wouldn't call it a village, but it was a collection of people that had come together to live at Mukatuna because there was silver and zinc and copper to be found there, you see. And as with all these mining places, they were going to make such a lot of money there. But I've also got a couple of reports from the mines department of the details in that Grandad Peer used to send down of the amount that he sent down. And I used to think, oh, how did he ever know what to send down? How did he ever know how to measure? But you see, in the last couple of years, I've found out he was a jeweller, or as some people say, a goldsmith. And of course, he knew how to measure the weights and the ounces and that sort of thing with the copper or zinc, nickel, silver, whatever he was mining. And I've got the one of the pages of showing his rights to the mine he'd purchased off of the chap who then owned it.
So they had about, now the interesting thing about the children they had is that Pir Muhammad gave all the children Afghan names. Can you remember them all?
Yes. The eldest daughter was called Zelika. Then the first son was Ghulam. The second son was Noor. Then Bibi Hema. She was after Ghulam. Bibi Hema. And then there was Noor. And then there was, well, we called him John. But in Grandad's language, it might have been Jan or something like that, because, you know, what we couldn't work out, especially as I got older and got a bit interested in this, is why Grandad gave Dad an Australian name and the others all had Afghan names. But you see, as I said, we found out after that possibly John was Jan or something like that in their custom, their language. Yes. So, and then there was a little girl, she died of whooping cough on her first birthday. Grandad Peer had walked 25 mile into Beltana, got the medicine for her, and then he walked 25 mile back with it, and when he got there, she had died on her first birthday. And so his wife, Ruby, and himself had to bury the little girl. So...
Now, eventually they moved away from Mucatoona, didn't they? They moved to Beltana, and then he became a widower.
Yes, well, see, he was a widower before he moved into Beltana.
Right.
Because he lost his wife, and he moved himself and the children into Beltana, and then he was left a single father.
Now, I did have to share this with you. He actually did struggle to look after the children. He worked very hard to look after the children. But he actually, I found, I don't know if I've got it here, Janice, an advert he put in the paper where he really wanted help and he asked for a housekeeper. Here.
That's correct, yes.
Up here, wanted. This is, so he's appealing for someone to help him look after the children.
Yes.
While he's still worked very hard to look after them financially.
Yes. Now, you see, that's interesting, because some of the paperwork, when I mean the paperwork, there's quite a lot written about him, and there's stories that are not quite right. Like I did see one written about him the other day, and Then they went on to say about his son, what his son did. Well, it's not what his son did at all. It's what his friend did. Because as in lots of families, there was two Gullums, you see. One was my uncle and one was a family friend. Well, he was the one that did what my Uncle Gould was supposed to have done. But that is how it's been written.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm getting
I
at,
do.
Pam?
Yes, I do. Yes.
The other Gullum married Esmeralda Lassou, the French girl, right? And that was old Gullum. Gullum Mohammed.
Yes.
See?
Your grandfather's an ED ending.
ED, yes. But you see, where this can comes in, I have difficulty working it out because some people say can is Mr. Now, some of the paperwork says Pir Muhammad Khan, and some of the paperwork just says Pir Muhammad, and that's spelled in many ways as well. But yes, he did struggle to keep the children and look after them. And at that time, he was working in the railways, and he used to get paid, of course, by the railways. And so, yes, unfortunately, the children finished up in what they call, well, we call it now today the welfare department, and that's what it was. They were brought down here to Adelaide, and so they then, Auntie Zell was 10, and apparently she was allowed to go and work for somebody, so she went to work for a family, and Nurajan, the baby, which I don't think I mentioned her.
Yes, you did. She's the one that died of whooping
No,
cough.
that was Bibi Jan.
Oh.
Bibi Jan, but Nurajan, she was the baby. Sorry, we can go through the family again if you like.
Don't have to.
Yeah. And so the children were educated for some part of the year. They would be educated at the state welfare, and that was in those days up at a little place called Ambleside, which is
in
now,
the Adelaide Hills.
which is in the Adelaide Hills, and it is now Harndorf. So because of the German name at that time and the war, they changed the name from Ambleside to Harndorf.
Now, eventually your grandfather did get back into the company of the Cameleers, didn't he, eventually? Because isn't he buried at Port Augustine? Wasn't he buried eventually by some of the Cameleers? They buried him the Mohammedan way?
Yes.
Do you remember much about that?
Well, you see, he buried, he died on the 19th of December 1942, and I was born January the 30th 1942, so I was only 11 months old when he died. And I always say I was either born too late or he died too soon, because I've got so many questions that I would love to know. But unfortunately...
Now, his brother-in-law was Mullah Assam Khan, so he must have sometimes gone up to Maree to see his sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law.
Yes, he did. And he went to Alice Springs, and he lived in Alice Springs for a few years. He had a shop in Alice Springs, a men's clothing shop. He had a clothing shop in Maree. When he was young, he worked on the East-West line, selling clothes, men's work shirts and trousers and all that sort of thing for the men. He did so much that we don't know about, that it's so frustrating at times not to know.
This is meant to be a picture of Pir Muhammad according to the data. Does that look like him?
Yes, that is him.
Hold it up for the camera.
Yeah, that is him when he was young.
So turn it around for the camera. Now, I notice he's wearing a lot of white clothing there. Was that of religious significance?
Yes. That's the Afghan wear that the men wore in their country, or in Australia if they were, an Afghan. That was what call it their costume, but their pantaloons and their kameez, and then their scarf, and of course between the scarf and the turban, well, that wasn't only a scarf or a turban, it was good to keep the sand out of their eyes, and it was for warmth, and it was just part of their costume, part of their culture, and it served their body for wherever they were.
So when he was with Mullah Azam Khan in Maree, that means he would have gone sometime into the mosque in Maree and met up with other Cameleers as well?
Yes,
they were like his community, would you say?
Yes, they were all together sort of thing. Because in Maree there was the Baluchas and the Mushas, and some other of the Cans and the Bijars, and then Auntie Agnes's husband, yes, and when Grandad passed away, my dad sat with him for the last week of Grandad's life in the Port Augusta Hospital, and when he passed away, Dad rang Uncle Gould, and Uncle Gould rang Asan Khan, and he came down and buried Grandad Pir in the Port Augusta Cemetery in the Muslim section of the Port Augusta Cemetery on the west side.
Yes, and there is a little Afghan section there.
Yes.
There's a couple of other Cameleers who have all been buried in there.
Oh, yes. There's other Cameleers, and there's a lot of unmarked graves that sadly we don't know who they are, but some of them are children that they died in the early days. But yes, I forgot to mention Auntie Rita, as we called her. But yeah.
And so when Agnes married Mullah Azam Khan and Barbara married Mir Muhammad in Maree, did they have a Muslim wedding as well as a civil wedding? Like they would have to be registered. Their marriage would have to be registered.
Apparently Grandad Pir and Grandma, they had a marriage, Western marriage, and also an Afghan one, or what they called a Muslim one and a Western.
Yeah,
that's what it was referred to in those days.
So what happened there with the Muslim wedding? How did that progress? What happened on that occasion? Do you know? Any details?
No details whatsoever. No details. No.
But didn't they used to marry like in a house? You didn't have to be in a mosque. You could be in a house.
No. You could be in a house. Yes. You could be in a house and that sort of thing, because there was no mosque, of course, in Port Augusta.
No.
But they must have been married somewhere.
Yeah, they were married in a civil office in Port Augusta. Then went up to Maree. There was quite a few Cameleers around Port Augusta. And I don't know whether Mullah Azam Khan came down. He was the local priest that would perform marriage ceremonies.
Yes.
Now, what about the charity? Because when I first met the Descendants, they would talk about charity.
Yes.
And that was at the end of Ramadan. They had charity.
Yes.
Do you know much about that? Or when they had funerals, they had charity?
Well, apparently when they had funerals, it was of course, it was a solemn time, of course, as is all religions, but they used to give out fruit, and they'd have oranges and bananas and apples and all that sort of thing, because I suppose it was a symbol of life coming, that there was something some meaning to the fruit, that it must have meant something to them to have fruit on hand to give out to whoever attended, that it was something that they just seemed to do. But the old Afghans, they stuck together fairly well. And when you think of the distances, that, well, one chap was here and another chap was 500 k's away, and they still kept in touch, or, you know, it come down through the pipeline somehow, that they always had contact.
Yes. That's what struck me too when I researched them, and I did a map to show, so I could see how far they walked with their camels. And like you said, Pierre was in Alice Springs, but he had family in Maree. He was down in Port Augusta. So
yes,
the distances they covered to make a living, they worked so hard. And they didn't give up when they were 60, did they? They kept on working.
They kept on working, yes, they kept on working. Well, what's his name? Aziz, he did his last load out of Broken Hill.
Sultan Aziz.
Sultan Aziz did his last load out of Broken Hill to Durham Down Station, which was part of Kidman property, and he was 102 when he loaded his camels and walked them out to Durham Down Station, and that was his last load, as I said, at 102.
Now, you've made some incredible comments about the Cameleers, how hard they worked, and your own grandfather, he never kept to one job and found that it failed. He was very flexible with his career choices. Like, he was hawking, he was selling clothes, he started with camels. What do you think is, what lessons can we learn from the Cameleers that came to this country and created a big community across the continent? What do you think could be some of the lessons from them for us today?
Well, there's so much that we should learn from them, but to see times have changed, and so therefore what we should do in some ways we don't do, because you see, the thing is, I don't only say Grandad Pierre, his race, if you like to say his race, his countrymen, his fellow comrades, they didn't all do what he did, but in another sense they did, because they worked hard. They were all hard-working people. As I said, they had families. You imagine a man with a camel team loading up his camels, saying goodbye to his wife, and she might see him in 3 months' time. That's right. And in that time, she's had to feed and clothe and look after those children. And, well, she knew he wouldn't come back, like within the week. So time just went by. She just went on, the mother just went on with the children, and father came home when he'd finished and taken his load to wherever it was, and then most times they tried to arrange that they brought something back. So it was take something to a location, a house, station and then bring something back that they had a reasonable sort of an income. But I don't only say that Grandad Pierre worked hard. They all worked hard. Each and every one of his countrymen worked very, very hard, not only to take what they had to do in their role of their work, but they opened up the country so that now we are, as a younger generation, getting the benefits. And
because
Michael,
when they went to the outback, they had no maps. There was no maps to make their life easy.
There was no maps. The only thing they had was the moon, the sun and the stars. And that's apparently what they worked by. And later, apparently, they did get a compass. But, of course, not every Afghan could afford a compass. So those that could, they bought them. But those that didn't have the money, well, they just went as they'd always done. But as Michael Sigleer, he wrote a book on Afghans in Australia back in the late 70s. He wrote that. And he said if it wasn't for the Afghans, this country, Australia, would have been delayed another 50 years because they opened up the transport industry of Australia. And so that's where the Afghan Cameleers should be acknowledged for doing what they did. And I'm pleased to see that this ambassador has been trying to do something in acknowledgement of what those men did. We don't need to be reminded of what they did every week, but the thing is, there should be some acknowledgement of what they did opening up this country and becoming the part of the transport industry of Australia. They had tried with horses. They couldn't carry the loads. The donkeys couldn't carry the loads. The bullocks were too awkward. And of course they couldn't carry the loads. And so, as I said earlier, when Sir Thomas Elder and Charles Ducky saw the camels, they decided to bring them to Australia. And so, of course, as I said, that's how the transport industry began, and that's what these men should be acknowledged for.
And they connected up places where these animals couldn't go. So, for example, when there were gold discoveries in Western Australia, they weren't along the coast. They were in the middle of desert areas where there were no pipelines of water, where there was a lot of sand, and somehow the water had to be taken to the mining areas. They helped to open up that country, otherwise Australia would not have exported as much gold as it did.
No,
Don't you think?
No, that's right. And you see, you think of a camel being loaded with, from anything from a reel of cotton to sleepers to build a railway line. And then once they loaded a piano on a camel, and he took that out. But it was very... The areas that they worked in was very arduous. Terribly, terribly hard. No roads mapped out, no streets done, no... they made their own roads. And
Yeah. And one of the ways to make their own roads was to find water.
Yes,
now, there
yes.
were government wells that were built for railway lines and stock routes.
Yes,
They
yes.
could have used those, but they had to go beyond those because the gold and
Yes.
the copper were not in the same place as the water.
That's
so
right,
the Cameleers
that's
had
right.
to go even further and walk for days until they found
did.
water.
They did. Sometimes they had to walk for days. And there's a can out of Hawker that apparently the Afghans used to build a little can.
It's like a pile of rocks.
Pile of rocks.
So you can see it far away.
And you could see that far away, as Pam said. But behind that, there would be feed for the camels and water. And so they knew that that was a good place to go. That was an ideal spot. Yes, and when I did the pre-run for the camel trek in 1987, that's what I had to work out, where to stop, where there was a bit of wood for a fire, where there was a bit of grass, and where there was a bit of, well, some, at least within a distance, some water, because that everybody had to be covered. Yes.